Welcome back to Mixed Up. I'm Emma.
And I'm Nicole.
And we're really excited to be here with you for this limited season of Mixed Up to celebrate the launch of the half of it in paperback. Be sure to get your copy from all good bookstores. In this season, we're going to look at being misidentified as mixed people, maternal wellness and healing our wounds, and an expert who has their finger on the pulse gives us their take on beauty standards and how they've evolved over the years. We don't want to spoil too much, but as always, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Today's guest is Nehanda Truscott-Reid, maternal wellness coach and founder of Soul Mama Journey. Soul Mama Journey supports women of colour through the transition of motherhood to heal, awaken and thrive from conscious conception through to healing from maternal burnout.
She also hosts the Soul Mama podcast and runs the Soul Mama Retreat, a sacred space for Black and mixed mothers to heal, rest and rejuvenate.
So I always say experience is the thing that brings us to create what we most need. And it was literally that for me. I was working in a corporate job, in a diversity and inclusion role with an all-white male team, ironically. And I decided I wanted to go into the journey of motherhood really intentionally and really consciously. And I wanted to have conversations from the very beginning around what it meant to consciously conceive, what it meant to move through pregnancy in a really mindful way, what it means to kind of call in and house and nurture the spirit of a child, and all of the things that I saw that were kind of targeted towards women at those stages were very practically based and very much about information, and it just didn't feel like there was any heart in it, any soul in it. And so I started to have this deepening desire to have the real deep conversations and started to read and research and train. And then by the time I actually conceived and had my daughter, I knew this is a whole next journey, and I think it's going to be the most important one of my life. I want to be here for it fully. So I left my job and I started my practice as a practitioner supporting mothers. And by the time I had my son 2 years later, I was so convinced and validated that it wasn't just me, that there were so many women who were yearning for that space to be seen and to be heard and to work through all of the things that motherhood brings up. And that's how Soul Mama was born.
I have so many questions. In the UK, to be honest, I'm not really aware of this role being really prominent, because obviously in the US we know that like doulas are really common and that's something that's in our vernacular, like that we know of. Is this a new kind of vocation that's coming up in the UK, or is it something that you see a lot of other people doing?
So I think it's been held usually by psychologists and therapists. So people, if they felt like they were having anxiety during pregnancy or postnatal depression or any of the kind of labeled what they determined to be psychoses or mental health issues, they would go through a GP and get referred to a therapist. But what I realized was that psychotherapeutic approach pathologizes women for something that is not our problem. Like it puts the burden back onto mothers for having a really overwhelming response to the fact that we're expecting women to carry the full labor and burden of responsibility of caregiving, of nurturing, of maintaining a job and a marriage and a home and themselves, and then expecting them to be sane and vibrant through all of that. Like that model for me is problematic, and it's very non-representative, it's very non-diverse. And so a lot of the nuances around culture and ethnicity that can be triggered when you go into creating another child and you're perhaps reliving some of your own childhood, but you're also mixing lineages with another person who may be of a different race, there isn't space to have that conversation when you go on a GP appointment or a healthcare visit. It's like, where are my cultural roots? How do I show my children my legacy? Like, there is no space for that. So I really felt like I created what I saw the gap and the need to be. And now I see there are a lot more of those conversations happening in the motherhood space, still very diverse and still not coming from a spiritual lens. And I think that's the thing that I bring with Soul Mama Journey, is that cultural awareness and sensitivity, my own personal lived experience and honesty about that, because I'm not coming from a place of expert, I'm coming from a place of experience, and that spiritual sacred lens as opposed to just practical information. So that's the kind of place I'm trying to serve from.
In other news, the Half of It paperback is out now. In celebration of the release of our dinky baby paperback book, perfectly sized for your handbag if I do say so, we have pulled together this very special limited series. If you still don't have your copy of our book, now's your chance. Nicole, give them a little reminder of what we cover in the Half of It.
In our book, The Half of It, we share interviews and storytelling from a wide range of diverse voices on their experiences of being mixed. We cover so many topics, from beauty to food to hair to stereotypes and mythology like the tragic mulatto trope.
But before we get back to the episode, we also want to say a big thank you to the incredible people
we admire so much
who said lovely things about our book, such as Hanako Footman, author of Mongrel, Ella Lee, author of Jaded, Miranda Kaufman, author of Black Tudors, Jasa Aluwalia, author of Both, Not Half, Dean Atta, author of Person Unlimited, Kathy Ray, author of How to Be Disabled and Proud. Massive thanks to all of you.
The Half of It, Exploring the Mixed Race Experience, is available from all good bookstores. You can find links in the show notes. And if by some chance you go into your local bookstore and it's not there, be sure to request it from the bookseller and they will order it in for you. You know, this type of guerrilla activity really helps new authors and gets our books out onto the shelves.
Everything that you described that's where all my fear about becoming a mother in the future comes from. It's not the actual mothering. It's not, the practicalities of having to look after a baby. It's all of the other things. And then, and then a toddler and then an adolescent. And it's none of those things. It's all of the things you've described, having to juggle all of those roles, having so much expectancy on you, having no outlet for the more nuanced and more complicated conversations that will come to the fore, whether it be, like you said, issues of identity that will come up for you when you become a mom, the issues of grief that will come up for you if you've lost a parent and you're no longer able to kind of touch base with that parent and, not just ask them for advice, but even ask them for information about you yourself and that you would have hoped to pass on to your child, or even just how triggering it is when you become a mother and you have no mother, if you've lost your mother or if you didn't have a mother, or, all of these things. So I think, I hope to be on the phone to you at some point when
But it's true. There is, and I think, there is less awareness of those emotional journeys. That's why I call it Soul Mama Journey, because it's really the journey of the mother's soul, because there is so much upheaval and potential triggering and just unlearning, relearning, inner child work, inner mother work. It's a whole transition. And I think we get force down the kind of consumerist line of okay, well, what buggy am I going to need and what products do I need to have? And you end up spending a lot of your time and focus in the wrong places. And that's why I feel like mothers are so underprepared and under-resourced when they get to that. And then they realize oh, wow, I had not given enough time and space or called in enough support to hold me during this part. So that was really the desire that kind of birthed Soul Mama Journey, and it's what I continue to see women needing and calling for is that space and that time and that place to be held, because you go from being a woman to being the sole nurturer, provider. Even in partnership, it's a very different dynamic than you would have ever been used to in your maidenhood. So being in that place, it's we don't have the rites of passage that, some of our ancestors would have had. We don't have the cultural village that's holding us. We don't have the sisterhood even, in a lot of capacities. And sometimes we don't even have our parents, as you mentioned. So there are so many levels of support that have been removed in our kind of individualistic nuclear families in this Western model that I feel that's really, really felt. And it needs to be supported and put back together so that women feel like they're able to resource themselves and to move through it in a way that doesn't just leave them broken and drained and burnt out and just depleted, but resourced and able to enjoy what is supposed to be a really beautiful and expansive journey. And it can be if we put these things in place. So yeah, fear not.
I think that's a really important thing to note, because it depends on your personality. But personally for me, I know myself, and I know if I'm prepared, if I'm ready, and if I know what I'm going into, I can then enjoy aspects of that journey. But if I don't, I probably won't. So, that readiness that you mentioned, like, we're also focused on being ready, like having the things, and that is not what we need to be ready with.
And the thing that I've realized is that, the fear and the worry and the concern, all of those are such visceral feelings, whether we've articulated them, are consciously aware of them or not, that a lot of the times, even when we're saying that we're ready to go into motherhood, that can show up in a really, a kind of a struggle to conceive, or just having a pregnancy that becomes really difficult. And a lot of the times, the medical system won't make those connections back to like, okay, what are your actual associations with motherhood? What were your experiences or role models? What do you need to unpack and release and forgive before you actually conceive? So for me, the journey takes two instrumental places, which is the conscious conception piece, which is, what do I need to release? Who do I need to forgive? What work do I need to do before I even call in the spirit of that child? And then there's the after piece. Like, once you've gone through the pregnancy and you've had the birth and you're in the postpartum, who am I now? And how do I want to navigate now? And how do I come forward into this new role as mother in a way that's going to be really positive and impactful for me and for the child and, whoever else is involved in that nurturing.
I want to talk about this conscious conception first of all, and dig into all those things you talked about, releasing and healing, and how we start to think about that, or even ask ourselves what that looks like.
Yeah.
Because I don't think most of us are not in our bodies and our heads like that.
Most of us are in our heads. Most of us are living from our heads. And I think most of us have been rewarded for living from our heads. And so I find women, particularly who've had, a career or a large kind of corporate success or business success, those are the women who actually probably find it harder to kind of come back into the body, drop into the heart space, drop into the womb space, actually start to slow down and listen and come from a completely different rhythm than just go, go, go. And so I find that really interesting.
Man, why are you calling me out like this?
I mean,
I feel dragged.
But it's testament of the society and the way we've been conditioned to live and to value ourselves. And so, it's usually at that trajectory when we're then deciding, oh, actually, I do want to start a family potentially, or I do want to think about having a child. Okay, let me now attack that in the same way that I will, go through everything else that I've gone through in my life, which is with effort, which is with strategy, which is with, time and energy and money. And it's like, actually, there's a very different energy that needs to be called in around conception, and it's a softening that needs to take place. It's a letting go. It's a yielding. It's a coming into the feminine in a way that we often haven't had space or time to do, or very many models of what that even looks like. So that's the first place that I start with women. Is like, okay, can we get still? Can we get quiet? Can we drop into the body and start to listen to your body and to your womb and start to make space for her voice to come through before you even attack it in that way and effort into it in that way? It's like, let's just come from a whole different paradigm, because that's what's necessary.
We're Good Form, and we help tell stories that move people. Like this podcast, for example.
Good Form is a purpose-driven marketing consultancy and production house, and our speciality is building community and culture.
We create podcasts, including this one, content, full-scale campaigns, social media strategies, events, and brand experiences. We help brands get clear on how they show up in the world and create creative that gets them seen by the right people.
Whether it's a top-rated podcast or an award-winning campaign, we know what it takes to make bingeable content and build community.
So if you've got an idea for a podcast the world needs to hear, or if your brand needs more main character energy on social media, get in touch. Find us at www.ongoodform.com. What are some of the more common things that you find people need to let go of before they take on that journey into motherhood?
I see one of two things. Either there has been a relationship with the woman's mother where she's trying to avoid everything that was done in her own childhood. So there is a vow, there is a conscious awareness that, perhaps certain things happened in your own childhood, that you want to do things very, very differently. And so there is a model that's been given that you're like, I want to go in the opposite direction. And because of that, there is a resistance, there's a static, there's a fear that despite all my efforts, might there be part of me that falls into this trap of mothering in a way that perhaps is toxic or perhaps doesn't, support the child in the way that I didn't feel supported. And so that's one of the biggest fears is I don't want to become my mum, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard that before.
Right? And then the other opposing one, but still equally valid, is my mum did everything. She had 7 kids. She worked 2 jobs. She upkept the house. She was a superwoman. She, was married for 30 years and she always looked good and the house was immaculate and she cooked amazingly. And I can't even fathom what it would take to be like her. And I'm so scared that I'm going to fail, and that fear is a very different fear, but it's equally as valid. It's like, I'm not going to live up to that model. And I feel like I'm going to be judged by my mother or others who know my mother. Or perhaps my partner's had a mother who's like that. And I feel like I'm not going to live up to that. But there is this fear that you're just going to fall flat and fail and be inadequate. So those are the 2 major kind of starting points. And I normally see like where women are on that spectrum.
Is it unavoidable?
I think there's an inevitability, right? There is.
Yeah, because everything you're saying, I'm just like, I just know that can be me, like at various points along the journey, and it's probably inevitable.
There is. I feel like we all fall at some place in that spectrum because we've all had a relationship with our mothers or caregivers that has set an imprint. And so we're always going to be responding to, okay, well, how would I do things differently? Or which parts do I feel were really good? And that's part of the groundwork. It's like, if I'm intentionally choosing how I'm going to go into motherhood, let's take the time to actually look at that. And instead of it being a blaming and a projection and a re-traumatizing situation, it can be done with care and with love and with space so that you can start to untangle some of the knots that might have literally collected in your body around that. And so that's a lot of the womb work that we do, is really understanding any mother wounds that might be present and working through the body somatically to release that. So every cycle becomes an opportunity to release that, every menstrual cycle. And we also do rituals and ceremonies and visualizations and breath work and all of these beautiful modalities which help women to kind of drop into a very different place of being with that conversation. But the other one is fear of birth, the visceral fear that they're going to die, they're going to lose their child, that there's going to be some sort of tragedy or crises or harm. And especially with the growing awareness of the health disparities.
Yeah.
That's also valid.
I mean, it's so valid. The whole thing is valid. Like, I ask my friends to tell me about their birth stories, about being a mother, about like their honest feelings around it, because I feel like we don't talk to each other enough, one. And for me as a person, Nicole says I'm like completely type A. But basically, I just need to know. I need to know what is potentially going to happen. And obviously, I know that's impossible. But I would like some frames of reference. And I feel like people are like weird about talking about this stuff. I'm like, we need to share with each other so we know what's happening. And I think, when I do hear a birth story that feels more joyous, that is amazing, because I'll be honest with you, a lot of them don't sound like that.
Yeah. And it's such a shame that that's the rarity. And that women who have had that experience also feel guilty or almost like they shouldn't share because the norm is that birth was tragic or there was trauma. And I feel like that is a testament to the way the medical system sets us up for the expectation around birth and the lack of real resourcing and real care and real nurture. That's a whole next conversation, and I speak about it on my podcast. So if anyone's interested, there's an episode with Kemi Birthjoy Johnson, who's a midwife, doula, and she goes in about the agendas that the medical system have and why Black women specifically might not want to choose a hospital as a place to birth their children. And as much as I'm not as anti-hospitals, my thing is you have to be in your sovereignty if you're going to enter into a system that doesn't have your best intentions at their core. So yes, information is important. Yes, being aware of the potentials is important. But the main thing is really trusting your body, trusting your baby, and actually standing in your power at every stage. So if you go into your antenatal appointments informed, empowered, you're less likely to be persuaded down a pathway that is unnecessary. If you have your voice and your conviction, then you're less likely to say yes to something that, other women would. So a lot of the work I do during pregnancy is to resource women with that strength and that trust and that faith, that a healthy birth is the default. That's what we should expect for ourselves, and that's what we deserve, and that's what we're worthy of. So everything else is beyond our agenda. So where possible, I would say have your baby at home, call in the support team that you know are going to hold you in your sovereignty, really prepare your partner, whether that's your birth partner or your partner, and really have those conversations from as early as possible. But that comes up in conscious conception work inevitably because the fear of birth can stop women even conceiving.
And I think, I want to go back to what you're saying, because I do want to dig into a little bit that kind of navigating a system with those kinds of disparities. And frankly, that where, we see a disproportionate amount of Black and mixed race women dying in childbirth. And then, also having really traumatic experiences that make them really have to question themselves whilst they are going through the, monumental moment in their lives of giving birth. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I was thinking about this as you were speaking, because I was thinking about how me and my husband, we do really operate as a unit in so many things. And obviously this is something where as much trust as you might have between you, you have to make a plan as to how you're going to handle that system that, like you said, is not completely out of your control, but maybe is out of the immediate agenda that you have to focus on, because you can control that aspect. How do you prepare your partner for helping you navigate through that? Because, at certain times you'll throw the ball to your partner and you'll be like, I actually haven't got capacity for this. I need you to now take this on, and vice versa. But obviously when you're dealing with the medical profession, we've experienced this recently when I was very, very ill, and there was times when he had to just make the decisions and he had to try and hear me. But it was hard because I didn't know the answers myself and I wasn't able to communicate very well at the time. And I'm thinking when you're in that environment, which feels so dangerous to women like us, how do you empower each other to kind of continue to work as a unit in that space?
I think that the unity of the partnership is so key at each of these stages, because even with conscious conception, a lot of women come into that on their own. I'm doing this with my partner, but I've taken full responsibility for my fertility, for the pregnancy, and I'm like, hold on, this is a 2-person job. So I feel as early as is possible to really get clear on what your values are, on how you intend to move through conception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, and to share what you're learning with your partner at each stage, and to explain the landscape, because a lot of the times, men are completely oblivious to the fact that there is any issue. It's like, oh, well, my mum had had 7 kids and it was all fine. And why do I need to now step in this way? However, some men are not like that and they're very informed and they want to be, you know, hands-on, etc. But I just think just acknowledging where there may be a gap and being there to bring your partner along the journey with you so that you feel that support throughout and that each of those decisions perhaps are made in union. So with the conscious conception work that I do, I invite women to choose, like, if there are sessions that I feel it would be really helpful if your partner also joins with you, let's bring him in or let's bring her in or however your partnership is set up. But also that a lot of the lifestyle changes that you're making, the positive lifestyle changes, whether it's around nourishment and food or around movement or around ceremony or around altar work, or these are things that your partner can be doing with you. It doesn't need to be a solo journey. And then if there's that investment and that time and that energy that your partner's then pouring in, then they will inevitably be more connected to the baby, to the pregnancy, to you in that journey.
To where you are emotionally.
Exactly, from the beginning. And that then sets up a really strong foundation for birth and for postpartum. However, if that isn't the case and your partner is, you know, I've worked with couples where the partner doesn't get what we're doing. It's not to say you can't still create a really strong environment and foundation, but it might be that that's when you really call on a doula or you call on a sister friend or you call on someone like myself to hold that space for you and be the continuum throughout throughout those stages. So it doesn't have to all fall on your partner, but if it can, of course, it just makes that journey a whole lot easier.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to note here, because of the nature of our podcast, obviously, you know, we've naturally spoken about interracial relationships. And I think it's really important to note that obviously, if you are a Black woman, if you are a mixed woman, if you are a woman of color, you are conceiving with a white person. They will not have any experience firsthand of the medical profession and how that looks for us. And so, you know, having that conversation really early on about what might happen and how you might be treated and what you might be facing as a unit, as a unit also is really important. Because I was just thinking again about that experience of being ill with my partner, and my partner is a Black man, a Nigerian, and is already not trusting of the health service. Is already always like, if you go to the doctors, remember that they could have got an E grade and they would still be a doctor. So I just want you to hold that in the front of their mind.
He's not wrong.
Like, literally, that's what he says to all of us, like me and his family. Whenever we go to the doctors, he's like, just remember that. So obviously go with your questions and like be bullish about your questions.
Yeah.
And don't take anything that feels wrong. So, you know, I'm coming from that place. But, you know, if you're coming with a partner that doesn't necessarily have that frame of reference already, doesn't already, you know, have that understanding of the disparity and what we're facing, then it's really, I think, probably prudent to have those conversations sooner rather than later.
It's a whole education. And actually, the sooner that conversation can happen, the better, because it's one of many conversations like that will continue to happen. Because not only is it your health and your birth, but there's also how your child is going to navigate this system. And they're going to potentially face things that your partner would have had no clue about and no idea about and not necessarily know how to resource that child. So I think that is crucial. But it's really sad to me when I've supported women who, say, for example, a Black woman with a white man, and I supported her all the way through her birth, and then she came back and she'd had some things go wrong. And she said, actually, the only thing that saved me in that instance was the fact that my husband is white and they listened to him. And it was like the privilege that brought was so different to, say, some of my clients who have Black partners who were then escorted out of the hospital because the security was called, right? And it's like, we can't deny and not acknowledge the ways that the intersection of race will play out in each of these crucial times of your motherhood journey. And that's what I really feel isn't spoken about in the conversations around motherhood is, yes, the way Western society is set up makes motherhood particularly challenging at this time. And there are extra levels that we also have to navigate if we are Black or brown women or we're mothering Black or brown children. So those are the extra levels where it's like, where are we speaking about that? Where are we speaking about the fact that more Black boys are suffering from autism because of the vaccinations that they've been offered at birth? Where are we speaking about the statistics around postnatal depression a year on because of the lack of support that have been held for mothers of colour after birth? Where are we talking, like the health disparities continue all the way along the way along the journey. So birth is the one that we know about and we're speaking about here, but it's a continuation. And so my charge is like, I don't just want women to survive that. I don't just want women to get through a system that's set up for us to fail. I want us to be so resourced that we know not either to enter those systems or we know how to navigate when we're in those systems, but we also know how to resource ourselves and to call in what we need so that we are less likely to be a victim of that and we are able to thrive. Like, we're not just here to just get through it, like, let's thrive through this.
Definitely. And also, you just reminded me when you were talking about the woman who said that sadly, like there was a moment when she had to call on her white husband or partner to basically, move things along because she wasn't being listened to. I remember actually my husband ringing his friend up before his child was born, and he was like, literally like, use your privilege, bro.
That's exactly it.
You're literally going to have to use your privilege, so just be aware.
And it's a shame that needs to be the conversation. And I think, my heart breaks because it's the place where you're supposed to be softening. Pregnancy is like one of the most vulnerable times. Birth is one of the most strongly intense but vulnerable times, right? And it's the time when you need to feel at your strongest, not when you need to be fighting and in warrior mode and thinking about your protection. And so I think it's really important to think, where do I want to place my energy and where do I want to place my efforts? And if you then feel like, actually, I could set up a really beautiful environment at home, like I could call in all the support that I need and create that space at home, why would we not? Right. And that continues on all of the points where we get to make decisions like, okay, everyone else is going down this line, whether it's breastfeeding versus formula or whether it's baby wearing versus putting them in a cot or sleep training. Like, all of these points of decision are usually set up to make something convenient because it works to get us back to productivity. It works to get us back to work, right?
Or it works on scale.
It works on scale for a society that's for profit, not for people. So when you realize all of those choices are because you're feeling pressured that you have to then get back to work, so your child needs to be more independent sooner, it's like you start to see the psychosis of the systems. And I think motherhood is the thing that lifts that veil. And it kind of, everything starts to kind of become really crystal clear. And it's like, why would I allow myself or my child or my family to be pigeonholed down a trajectory that's moving us away from our humanity? Like, it may sound deep when I'm speaking about things like using a dummy or a cot, but when you really start to peel back the layers, it's about severing the bond between mother and child. And so anything that threatens that mother-child bond, for me, is like, no, like, I want to keep that sacred. And that means that those women who usually choose whether they are going to breastfeed or carry their babies for longer or stay at home off maternity leave, they're actually punished. Whether it's not being able to return to work at the same level that you left, having a decrease in pay because you want to stay longer than the given maternity pay, having more sleepless nights because you actually wake up and breastfeed instead of just letting somebody else feed with a bottle. And so those are the women that end up coming to me at the other side, burnt out, because they've made choices that support that mother-baby bond. They've made all of those choices with that intention, But because of that, they're actually more exhausted physically, emotionally, and mentally. And then they're broken and they're like, I've done my best and I'm like struggling. And so I really realized like, it's like you're having to go counterculture. You're having to really take stands at each of these points and say, I am going to do the extra work to understand what is going to be best for me and my child and my family. And I'm going to stand in that choice and resource myself as much as I can. And that's what I'm here to do, to reflect that back and to support that and to hold space for that, because we need it. We need it.
We do. I want to go back to the mother wound. Talk to me about what the mother wound is for those that don't understand, haven't come across it yet.
So the mother wound really relates to having a visceral core need that wasn't met by your mother or your caregiver. So it might not have been consciously registered at the time, but over time, when those needs continue to not be met, you end up having this wound, this mother wound. And it may be that perhaps your mother was working and therefore they weren't able to be physically present, or perhaps you didn't feel safe in your home dynamic for whatever reason, and so they weren't able to provide that safety, or maybe they weren't able to play for whatever reason. It can be small or large on the spectrum of wound. It doesn't necessarily need to mean that your mother did anything directly to you, although that also is within the mother wound language. It's really just feeling like you came out of childhood with needs that weren't met.
Do you think that we all come out of childhood with some need that's not met? Like, does everybody have a mother wound?
Yes. Yes. And father wounds. What I've noticed though is that because of the ways that society is designed, other cultures might have wounds in more predictable ways, right? So say, for example, if you look in America and the statistics around the amounts of Black men who are incarcerated, there are going to be a lot of Black people who are growing up with a massive father wound because their fathers were not present. That's not something that was intrinsic to that family. That was something that was systemically designed. And so what I'm starting to kind of bring back to people is that it's not a blame on your individual mother or your individual father. There is a zooming out which needs to take place to begin to realize, like, okay, what were the societal structures and systems of oppression that were operating on my family at these times? And how did that uniquely create the circumstances that would have inevitably meant that my mum or my dad didn't show up in their best ways for me all the time?
So I'm interested to know, because obviously, given the nature of our podcast, we do speak to a lot of people who have carried some trauma from their relationship with their parents, whatever that dynamic might have been. And that's once again, a broad spectrum. What have you seen come up for mixed race people and their kind of like their identities, relationships with their parents and the mother wound?
There's a really interesting nuance that happens when we are racialized in ways that are very different to our mothers, specifically as women, I'm speaking about now. So if you are operating in a white society as a woman of color and would have been treated that way from being a child, if you have a white mother, it's very likely that she may not have been resourced or informed or prepared to give you the tools in an embodied way, in a way that she was modeling, that gave you that confidence of, oh, this is how I move in the world. This is how I be. This is how I need to survive certain things or how I get past certain things. So I know from my own experience, my mum is white and I'm mixed race. My dad's Grenadian. But there were lots of situations that happened just in the school playground where, you know, certain dynamics were happening with Black girls and with white girls that my mum had no clue about because she was never in that dynamic as a white woman, as a white girl, you know? And so there was a lot of explaining I had to do, which other of my friends would never have had to have done because their mums just got it because they lived it, and they are now being able to kind of pass on the tools of, you know, this is how I got over this is what I would say you should do. This is, you know, those kinds of conversations. So I feel like there is a lot that parents can do if you're coming into an interracial relationship, especially now. I do think our generation are more informed, more aware, have the language, have the tools. There is so little excuse to be ignorant now. But in generations past, where they didn't have that, then it's inevitable that there would have been a lot of mistakes made. And a lot of those mistakes would have caused extra rupture or created extra deficits in that kind of mother wound space, right? And even something significant as insignificant seemingly as having a completely different hair texture and phenotype expression, visible outlook, in yourself as your mother, and that constant questioning of like, oh, is that your child? Is that your mum? That sense of belonging to your mum, which should be the first bond, right? Gets severed really quickly because you're like, oh, do I not look like I'm your child? Where do I fit in this dynamic?
And we always talk about how mothers navigate that misidentification, but we don't often talk about how children navigate that and like how it affects them throughout their lives.
There are going to be lots of moments of significant kind of rupture potentially where we're looking to our mother to be the person who gives us that affirmation or that reassurance or that skill to navigate a situation or a challenge that our mothers may have been ill-equipped for or not resourced to do. So when I've been in spaces where a lot of mixed race women have gathered and we've started to have these conversations about, some of the things that stand out about their childhood, the shame around hair comes up all the time, the feeling of not feeling beautiful because you were comparing yourself to a standard of beauty that was a woman who looks completely different to you. And so I think there are lots of nuances that are unique to the mixed race experience that in the mainstream conversation around mother wounds is normally polarized into like the mainstream mother wound and then the Black mother wound. And I was like, where are all the mixed race women in this conversation? Because that dynamic is very different again. And when I look at the friends who were raised by Black women, they might not have some of those issues because their mothers were already navigating the society as a person of color. And so they had those tools. They were modeled an example of what it looks like to navigate that way. And so they feel a lot more like clear on, and less like they had to work that out themselves, Whereas a lot of the things that I've come to is because I really had to work out, okay, how am I going to navigate this dynamic, with the Black girls and the white girls in my school? Where do I fit? Who do I choose to orient myself with? What do I share about my family? Who do I invite into my home? How do I speak about my mom? Like, all of those things were really big learning points that I don't see a lot of my peers who weren't mixed race having to navigate.
Yeah. I think there's often a bit of a gap when it comes to those nuances of the mixed race experience growing up in general. So yeah, I think it's a really important one to talk about. And I think even in general, monoracial parents, whether they're Black, whether they're brown, whether they're white, don't have experience of the mixed race experience and those things that come along with that, whether it be being misidentified because people don't clearly see you for who you are and can't necessarily understand your heritage based on the way that you look, whether it be racial legitimization, which is where you have to literally prove to people that you are what you say you are. Like monoracial parents generally can't understand those experiences. So I think that mother wound can probably come regardless of whether you have a white parent or not.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm reflecting on some of the things that I've heard women share as well, particularly in circle spaces where, sometimes whatever racial awareness your mother has held or not, really makes a big difference as well in terms of how educated and aware she is on how racism exists and how culture is and and the nuance of the place that you're growing up in and how diverse that is as well. Because a lot of mixed race girls have either felt a shaming in their own home or a sense of needing to deny parts of themselves or their culture or heritage, or an ask to perform whiteness or blackness. So like, I'm thinking of so many personal experiences. I'm thinking which one makes sense to share. But say, for example, in my home, my dad was Rasta, and had a Rasta community of Black friends. And my mum was the only white person who came to the Nyabingi. That was the gathering of all of these Rasta men and their families. And I felt so awkward as a mixed race child there. Everyone was judging me and my brother. And the friends, I say friends, the other kids that I was rolling with would literally like bully me and like make me say things or that they knew would get me into trouble. And I did it because I was, scared. And I didn't have the language to articulate that I'm finding this really uncomfortable. But likewise, when I was with her white family and I was then the only brown person there, I also felt uncomfortable, So it's having space for mixed race children and their parents, if they're entering into an interracial relationship, to really begin to have conversations around, okay, who do we want to call around us and how do we want that to be? And I think now there's less of a need for that perhaps than there was in when we were growing up, because mixed race is the fastest growing population. And so there are so many more of us.
There are, but I would argue that there's still a huge gap in dialogue around our experiences and our journeys. We are just starting this conversation, in my opinion, having done all the research we've done for the book and through the podcast. And I think, it's just important to note that, because although we are the fastest growing demographic, I was talking to an academic about this the other day who literally studies specifically like childhood and the mixed experience. She's like, we're still invisible when it comes to the actual depth of the experiences, histories, stories, and basically what's going on.
Which is why it's so good that this podcast exists and the work that you're doing is so important. And I think it inevitably comes into the work that I do, because all of those fears that we spoke about at the beginning, or all of the preparation work that you're doing on an embodied level to prepare yourself to become a mother or to move into that journey, it's going to need to take into account race as well, and ethnicity and culture and ancestry, because that is the journey that we're going on as calling in the next generation. And so the more prepared and aware and intentional we can be, the better.
Thanks so much for listening. As always, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel by searching Mixed Up. There you'll be able to watch all of our video episodes with our incredible guests. You can also find a link in the show notes. Also, please do leave a rating and review, as it really helps us independent podcasters.